Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and I'd like to ask a question. So, as the Prime Minister is out of the country, we had a Deputy Prime Minister's questions, which means deputy leaders take part. So, with Kemi Badenoch not taking any direct role at all, that means she couldn't mess up, right? Oh dear. Only I think she managed to mess up really quite badly by putting Tory serial failure Chris Philp up against Angela Rayner. What do you think?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, they had 14 years of failure on these issues. We've also included 4,500 foreign national offenders that have been deported since we came into office, Mr. Speaker, more than they did in the same period. I take no lectures from the Johnny-come-lately who couldn't do anything when he was in office.
But first, for Daily News and Politics, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So, the Tories are trying to gain some advantage out of grooming gangs.
They told us how authorities deliberately covered up the systematic rape of young girls and some boys by gangs of predominantly Pakistani heritage men. They covered it up because they cared more about so-called community relations than about protecting vulnerable girls. That is disgusting. The survivors told us they will only have confidence in an inquiry if it is independently led, has full statutory powers, covers all 50 towns affected, including Bradford, if those who covered this up are prosecuted, if foreign perpetrators are all deported, if survivors are closely involved, and if it is set up before the summer recess. Can the Deputy Prime Minister give the survivors and their families those assurances?
Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, can I thank him for his tone and putting the survivors and victims at the heart of his question here today. I think it's absolutely right that we all look at what's happened over the last couple of decades, the countless reports that we've had, and we look to implement that. He's absolutely right to also talk about the confidence people must have in that independent inquiry. And the member that my friend, the Shadow Home Secretary, spoke about that earlier this week in regards to Baroness Casey's report. So we will take that forward at speed, Mr. Speaker. It will be independent, it will have statutory powers, and we will implement the J report, which was he will have known about as the Shadow Minister in charge, the Minister in charge at the time, and we'll get on with taking the action. I hope members of his party will take his tone in making sure the whole House put the victims first and we all work together to get to the bottom of it.
The problem is that by trying to reference the Casey review, which Labour ordered, remember, and acted on, they just invited Rayner to reference a key part of the review, which is that the previous government, the Tory government, wasted an entire decade where they did nothing.
And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
Phil was knackered from the start, in all honesty. This is not a fruitful line for his party. You can see Reform UK trying it. For the Tories, I mean, not only was Angela Rayner able to fire back with interest every single time, even Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson during the women's questions beforehand, and she's not a natural performer at the dispatch box, even she was able to fire some venom back to the Tories.
Speaker, as the Home Secretary set out on Monday, anyone found to have been responsible for covering up or for hiding vile crimes of child sexual abuse must and will be prosecuted. But I would say to the Right Honourable Lady, they had a decade. That was the lost decade that Baroness Casey talked about. The recommendations from Alexis J sat on a shelf and were not acted upon. But this government immediately brought forward the Children's Wellbeing in Schools Bill to deliver the biggest upgrade in child protection legislation in a generation, which they opposed.
But, you know, you could argue it wasn't Philp's idea to go with the topic, although he is stupid enough to have agreed to do so. But he did make two fairly large errors. The first was implying that Starmer may have to answer personal questions when the independent inquiry comes knocking. You know, because he referenced past directors of public prosecutions. But this is Starmer's strength. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions who broke open the grooming gang scandal at the Crown Prosecution Service. He was the one who made sure investigations took place rigorously, that offences were actively rooted out, and thousands of abusers were prosecuted by him. Insane for Philp to give Rayner such an easy line to both. I mean, Rayner was able to promote Labour's seriousness on the issue under his leadership now, because everyone is saying, yes, successive governments have failed here. Successive governments. Labour are saying, yes, the last Labour government didn't do enough. So will people really believe this current Labour government will? Well, the current Labour leader is the one who took it seriously over 10 years ago, provably.
The Prime Minister.
Well, I say, Mr Speaker, that the Prime Minister did not just raise issues but acted on them. He brought the first prosecutions against grooming gangs, called for action to address ethnicity issues in 2012. And the honourable member will know that the data that the previous government collected was inaccurate and not complete. And Casey recognised this, and it's one of the recommendations that we will be taking forward. The Prime Minister made those comments specifically about Tory ministers who sat for years in the government and did absolutely nothing about this scandal.
But it also allowed Rayner to target Tories' weaknesses. Because while Starmer was doing all he could as a prosecutor over 10 years ago, bringing people to justice, carrying out investigations, it wasn't other people carrying out investigations, putting stuff on his desk and goes, yeah, okay, prosecute them. He was actively going after grooming gangs. At the time, the Conservatives were in power and they did nothing. And they had multiple prime ministers. At the time, it was David Cameron in charge. He didn't do anything. Then it was Theresa May. She didn't do anything. Then it was Boris Johnson. He didn't do anything. Then it was Liz Truss. Okay, she didn't really have time to do anything. Then it was Rishi Sunak. Didn't do anything. The next mistake, arguably, was trying to then tie all this in with a spurious link to the Rwanda scheme. He tried to claim that the Rwanda scheme would have stopped channel crossings, but was never implemented. Few little problems with that, though. First, the Tories claimed it was up and running before the election. Second, the scheme was designed to send a maximum of 200 asylum seekers to Rwanda a year, an absolute maximum. And the Rwandan government had the right to refuse anyone on any grounds. So if we were going to be sending, let's say we sent the maximum of 200 a year at a cost of billions, remember, what were they going to do with the other tens of thousands? Hope that they just didn't come over because of what? Because of what? A 0.4% chance that they were going to be sent to what the Tories were describing as a great new life in nice new housing that the British government had built for them in Rwanda. And then Rayner had another angle as well.
Well, Mr Speaker, this is a very serious issue and more needs to be done. And let me update the House. Working with our allies, we've carried out a series of major arrests to tackle smuggling gangs behind this vile trade. In the past month, a ringleader that smuggled almost 4,000 migrants has been jailed for 25 years. We could go further thanks to the law enforcement agreements we struck with Germany, Italy, Serbia and the Balkan states. In stark contrast to the honourable gentleman, he was the man at the heart of the Home Office when immigration soared. We lost control of our borders and spent £700 million of taxpayers' money on persuading just 4 volunteers to be removed from Rwanda. I take no lectures.
The government's laughable plan to smash the gangs lies in tatters. So will she now at last accept we need a removals deterrent so every single illegal immigrant arriving on these shores is immediately removed? Will she commit to that, yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, if they want to argue that 40,000 arrivals since July 24 are down to the scrapping of the Rwanda scheme, they need to explain why there were more than 43,000 arrivals in the same period starting in July 22 when the Rwanda agreement was in place. It's absolute rubbish, Mr Speaker. They lost control of our borders. We're getting control of our borders. He needs to apologise.
Chris Philp.
I don't see how she has the brass neck to claim she's got it under control.
I'll tell you what, he doesn't like being told what to do by a northern lass, does he? Oh my goodness, the veins were popping out of his head.
As a consequence of the government losing control, they are now accommodating growing numbers of illegal immigrants, many of whom cross the Channel, in asylum, hotels and flats. The Home Office's suppliers are now actively offering above-market deals to landlords to get hold of their properties to be used for illegal immigrants. In the meantime, hard-pressed young people here are unable to rent or buy. So why is this government prioritising housing for illegal immigrants above housing for our young people?
So again, Mr. Speaker, I gently say to the right honourable member opposite that under their watch, immigration increased fourfold until it reached almost 1 million in a single year. They also created the backlog, 400 hotels, which we've reduced to just over 200 hotels in the first 12 months of us being in government, Mr. Speaker. £1 million a day spiffed up the wall because they were so incompetent. We're building the homes that they failed to deliver over 14 years of consecutive failure by their government. They should apologise while we get on with the job of rebuilding Britain.
But there we are, another PMQs where the Tories are frankly just taking the wrong lines. I've said enough. I think Labour are taking a lot of the wrong lines. Both of them are effectively just trying to use the battlegrounds that Reform UK are choosing. I don't think it's sensible. The problem here for the Tories is twofold, makes it worse than it does for Labour. First, they're only using Reform UK battlegrounds. That's the only pictures they're using. Labour at least are moving on employment rights, they're moving on housing, they're moving on net zero, things like that. The Tories are just aping Reform UK. And the second problem for them, of course, is that they are in opposition. The only way they can gather votes now is by persuading people that they will improve things without really being able to prove it. And how do you do that if all you're going to say is that you think Reform UK, the party that's ahead of them in the polls right now, is actually getting most things right? But there we are anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the subscribe button, or you could join for memberships to have access to streams and behind the scenes videos. And until next time, I'll see you later.